I want to point out to you this pocket that's been cut in here, and this is what we're going to fix, and we're going to use some epoxy to do that. This is actually about a 1/64 of an inch or so deeper right here than it is up here on the painted section. So in effect the neck is resting on this painted section right here, and the heel of that will be resting back here somewhere, perhaps a little on this side. So this is maybe even a little deeper, maybe closer to a 32nd of an inch right here, and this side is up a little higher. It's a really bad job. We're going to fill this in with epoxy and try to fix this and give the guitar a little more sustain. Okay, I'm going to use JB Weld to attach or to put a bed under the neck in the body of the guitar. I did a test right here with it to make sure that I had a good releasing agent. JB Weld is an epoxy, a two-part epoxy, and what I did was I cut some grooves in the wood here. You can't see them anymore because I filled them in now. I cut some grooves with a chisel in the wood, then drilled a screw hole right through the middle of that, filled it in with JB Weld, and then put some wax, some furniture wax, on this block of wood. And this actually isn't even a finished block of wood, it's just a bare piece of maple, and screwed it down to the board and let it set for a day. When I pulled it off, the screw came out just fine. The block came off just fine, so using furniture wax as a release agent works very well. Later, I went ahead and wiped that furniture wax off of the wood with alcohol. Now, since this was bare wood, I don't think it all came off very well. And by the way, I'm not using denatured alcohol, I'm just using isopropyl alcohol. I think the denatured stuff used on a finish like what you have on the neck itself would probably ruin the finish. So at the very least, it's going to dissolve the finish a little bit. And the reason I'm taking that wax off is if later I decide I want to finish the neck, I want to make sure I didn't leave any wax on there that I've forgotten about. All right, so again, JB Weld, I'm going to use that to fill the guitar body. That's the next step we're going to do. Okay, I actually have never done this before, except for the test that I showed you a little while ago with the block and the JB Weld. So, a couple things I'm doing to expedite this, make it a little easier. First, instead of removing the strings from the guitar, I put a capo on the neck, loosened the strings up, and then I took the neck off and left the strings on the neck. Clipped them together with a clothespin here, by the way. The purpose in doing this, or the reason for doing this, is so that when I put the neck back on here, I will not have to restring it in order to check that the neck is aligned. We'll check it with the E strings here and to make sure it's aligned. I won't have to restring it to do that. I don't have to throw these strings away. I just tighten them back up and I can play. That's number one. Number two, I've taken all the screws out of the pickguard except for two, actually three. I left a third one. I didn't realize I'd done that. So I've taken all the screws out of the pickguard except for two. That's because I'm going to have to turn the guitar upside down when I'm putting the screws in. I don't want the pickguard flopping around on me. Okay? But I do want to be able to take the pickguard out right after I get done putting the screws in, because if any of that epoxy squeezes up behind the neck and gets under the pickguard, I don't want the pickguard glued to the body of the guitar where I have to take a chisel and pry it off of there and, you know, ruin the finish of the guitar and probably the pickguard as well. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this part of the neck here of the guitar, the heel of the neck here, and I'm going to wax it thoroughly with the furniture wax. I'm going to do all the edges, okay? And then this area in here I'm not going to wax, obviously, because I'm going to put epoxy in this area. So I'm also going to wax the screws, and I'm going to let them dry for a little while. So I'm going to put some wax on the threads of the screws. I'm going to let them dry. I don't want a huge amount on there. I just want enough that the epoxy won't stick. That way if any of the epoxy gets down in these screw holes, I don't have a problem, hopefully. If I happen to permanently glue this neck to the guitar, oh well, I mean, that's the point of the experiment and of the test here, to see if I can do this. So let's hope that I don't do that, because I'd like to be able to remove the neck and just have it well bedded. We're going to start by wiping some of this stinky old Johnson paste wax on the neck of the guitar and on the screws and letting them set up for a while. Letting it set up for a while and get nice and hard so that it doesn't, none of this stuff slips, or sticks, I mean. So put a good coat on there. Wouldn't go all the way up top. You need to go more than obviously 3/8 of an inch or so past the screw holes. Make sure you do a little more than that though. I wouldn't go into the fingerboard. Be very careful not to do that because that'll be kind of hard to get loose. Why am I putting it on the sides? Well, by design, this epoxy is going to squeeze out. If it does not squeeze out, we didn't put enough epoxy in there to set up a good bed. So, understanding that it is going to squeeze out from the bottom, it is going to squeeze up somewhere, and that's probably around the sides of the neck, especially if there's any room there. So we want plenty of wax on there to make sure that isn't a problem. Now I'm just going to actually dip the screws in the wax and go as far up the neck on that as on the neck of the screw as I can. But I don't want any of the epoxy getting on the finish out here and ruining this finish. If it does, I'm going to have to sand it down and redo the body. So I'm going to put a little bit of wax right here on these areas. And I'm going to buff that off, and that's just to make sure that if I get any epoxy slipping out, it's not going to ruin the finish. A little bit right here. After all that I did before, I decided that I was going to actually protect myself a little bit better from messing up with this epoxy. The first thing I did is I added wax to the pilot holes. Since the screws come from that side, these are actually pilot holes. So I put wax in the pilot holes, just gobbed it in there with a toothpick. Over on this side, on the neck, I put another coat of, even after I buffed it off, I put another coat of wax on there and didn't buff it off this time. Also, I wasn't paying attention before. There was a hole right here in the middle, and I really didn't want to fill that up and pour epoxy through that. So what I did is I put a 1/2-inch dowel in that hole. Just cut off a piece of 1/2-inch dowel and stuck it in there. It doesn't stick up above this edge, so I'm going to have to fill in a little bit with epoxy, but just a tiny bit. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some epoxy now and start with actually doing this. And when I get done with that, I'll take the pick guard off and set it aside.